What do you think the signal is here, Brian?
Yeah, I do think, well, first of all, it's great to be with all of you, and thank you for having me.
Thank you.
I think this decision is really an important one and also a strong signal to the market, but also to the company that, yes, it's back to the roots of Alibaba, the culture, the original sort of drivers of what motivates the business, and bringing in those who really have a strong understanding of where that all started, and also individuals who contributed to building what the company is today from the very start.
Brian, how closely did you work with Joe Tsai, Eddie Wu, and Daniel Zhang during your time at Alibaba?
Well, Joe is actually the individual who hired me back in 1999, and Jack, I served as a special assistant for globalization for a number of years. Daniel, I've known since the time he joined. So all of these individuals are people, and Eddie Wu as well. Eddie has been there from the start. He's one of the co-founders of the company. He actually worked with Jack before Jack even started Alibaba, when he was at the company China Pages, Jack's first internet company. So I've known all these individuals during my time at the company.
Let's dig in, Brian, therefore, with Eddie in particular. He moves really to a focus to leadership. What do you think at this moment we will be seeing from a CEO when we are still thinking of the restructuring of this business? Does that still stand as it had been outlined by Daniel previously?
Yeah, obviously, I think the decision to split the company into 6 parts remains the plan. The question is who would lead the holding company, Alibaba Group, which now is more of an investment holding company than an operational company. Eddie brings a number of strengths to the company today in the leadership role. Obviously, he has a very strong technology background. He's played the CTO role, or technology sort of leader, for companies ranging from Alibaba.com to Alipay, Taobao, Alimama, which was the key driver for the ad system for Taobao back in the day. He's run all of these, and also served on the boards of companies like Ali Health. But he also has a strong business acumen. I mean, to be able to construct this full ad network under Alimama and serve as general manager. He also, during his time, has done investments. He has his own fund that he set up in 2015. So he's seen virtually every angle of the business, but also not just in China, but he's also seen the world outside of China from a technology standpoint, from a business standpoint. I think Eddie has really gained the skills that are required for a CEO in this sort of role. And at the same time, he brings an understanding of Alibaba's culture, which is so important in terms of the longevity of the business. Yeah.
Brian Wong coming to us from Shanghai, Caroline, 52nd employee at Alibaba. I find Daniel Zhang the most interesting. He gets to take the lead of the crown jewel, the cloud business. Do we read that as a demotion, Brian?
I would actually see that as a vote of confidence. I think that any individual who would be the CEO and chairman of the most important business within this sort of organization and try and run the holding company at the same time is a superhuman, and probably it's an inhuman task to expect them to do both. I think Daniel himself had suggested that he really focus on the most important operations, that being Ali Cloud, and managing that business to success. He's done that and proved he could do that in the other businesses that he's run. So I would not look at it as a demotion. I would look at it as a vote of confidence and allowing Daniel to really help the company take what is most important forward and become successful, particularly when they're spinning out the company.
Of those 3 individuals, who can navigate the political landscape of China most capably?
Well, I think that in today's market, what's really important is being able to build a business amidst a changing regulatory environment. I think that requires skill and competency and understanding the technology, but also being able to kind of work within the system. And I think that's going to be a group effort, not one individual, but probably a team as a whole that has expertise in understanding different aspects of the facets involved. And I think Eddie, as I mentioned, has a collection of those skills, but I think this also comes into play where the larger organization will assist in guiding. And also the 6 business unit heads. Each of them will be responsible for their individual units, and each of those industries has unique regulatory considerations.
Let's focus in on the man who hired you, Joe Tsai, because he really understands the relationship between the US and China. Many know him here more affably as the Brooklyn Nets owner, as an owner of some significant real estate here in New York City, Brian. And I'm interested as to what he does, his relationship with investors, but also his relationship navigating political and geopolitics at large when it comes to the tensions between the US and China.
Yeah, I think Joe as chairman is a fantastic choice. He's a consummate investor. That's where his sort of original focus was prior to Alibaba. But he's also a trained lawyer who has an understanding of good governance and how to navigate these regulatory systems. And he's, like you mentioned, international. He's educated in the United States, worked all over the world. And he has the sensitivity and understanding of how to kind of balance these things. I think in a chairman role, that's exactly what an organization as big as Alibaba needs, and one that has international aspirations. He is in a very good position, given his background and skills, to kind of play that role and really help bridge the company from China to the world and vice versa, the world to China.